right, everybody, welcome to your autopilot lecture. I am sharing my screen, right? I always like to confirm before I start talking.
Yes, you are.
Good. So it is April 1st, and right now, today, as we speak, let me just pull up the actual syllabus here. We had a bunch of days built in where I was going to be in my office, basically, and helping people mostly with posts, which are now completely non-mandatory. So it's very likely that in the next couple of days, I'm going to publish a new schedule that reflects the elimination of all these extra days. So what we have left is Autopilot and FMS, which I'm going to go over basically today. Make sure you turn your homework in. I'm still grading the homeworks for submission, and then I'll be posting the Autopilot and FMS key to it. I'll post it tomorrow morning early. And then all we have is Friday, Monday, and Wednesday. That's it as far as communications, navigation, flight instruments. I'm not going to run a live review. I'm going to get all the quiz 7 and 8, which is now just called quiz 7, and the final. I'm going to put together just a recorded video that will help you study. I'm still going to hold office hours the same as I'm doing, like 12 to 1, and then record class 1 to 2. But like I said, we only have the 3rd, the 6th, and the 8th. There's no PUSD off day. Obviously, I built that into the schedule, hoping against hope that the kids would go back to school. That is apparently not happening. Anyway, and then we can't really play final review Jeopardy, so I'm just going to have to post the slides and kind of go over them in my review. And then this study / catch up on CBTs on Friday, April 17th was mostly just so you guys could come by my office and get help with the posters, which are no longer necessary. You remember the contingency plan for the poster presentations? I've eliminated that, so as of tomorrow, I'll probably be posting a new schedule for y'all. And I'm going to send out in an announcement a request for any kind of, extension requests. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the final exam up. So where we would have done, let's see, the study day, April 17th, that'll instead be your final exam, at least for most of you.
So,
okay.
Professor, for that, moving the exam up, can our CBTs still be due like after when they're supposed to be due?
Yeah, the CBTs need to be due by the end of the semester. And, I've been considering different ideas because this final exam, it's going to be timed. I'm actually seriously considering just really making a huge bank of essay questions so that no two people will really get the same combination of questions. And then the other questions that I was just looking at your final, there's approximately 10 questions out of each question bank. So quiz 5, quiz 6, and then quiz 7, which used to be 2 quizzes. So it's actually quiz 7 and 8 together. There's 40 questions right there that are multiple choice. And there's a huge bank in each one of them. So what I might do is just make your final like a take home on your own time, but due on no later than, say, Monday, April 20th. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like I'll
open. And what would the timing be if you change it to like the fill in the blank?
Well,
like short answer.
I'm not sure yet. I'm gonna have to really take a good look at it, but I think probably give you about an hour and a half, maybe, depending on how many different essays I choose. What I have to do, this is my own personal standards. I have to up the level of difficulty just a little bit because of the fact that you can have Kahoot open, you can have your slides open. I mean, everything is fair game. I can't limit you to a Word document because we're not in class together. So let me think on that. Likelihood is that I will open the final exam for your completion on Friday, April 17th, and then shut it down on Monday, April 20th at, say, midnight. And then
And Alex asked a question over chat. Are the homeworks going to be due before class? So are they now due at 1, or are they still going to be due at 3?
oh yeah, just put them in at 3 at the latest. Canvas is actually programmed now not to take any late deductions until midnight. So what that means is that tomorrow morning I'll wake up and I'll go grade everyone's, and if you're late, the Canvas automatically deducts I think 10%. So as long as you've got them in by midnight after class, you're good. I've been given more and more time for that actually, because people were they kind of needed class in order to complete some of the homework sometimes. So we're going to eliminate posters completely unless you want to do one like we talked about, and then that timeline is really flexible. Basically, I have to have, if you want it for extra credit, I have to have it by the day that my final grades are due.
Which is?
Usually 27 April. Either 27 or 28. They give you like one day after the whole formal final exam week, and it changes. This semester, who knows? They may give us all kinds of extra time to finish it, but I'll be in touch with the 3 or 4 people that want to do that. That's you too.
You are the most accommodating professor I have.
Well, I mean, I'm also the one that's struggling the most at home with 2 kids at home, and I can kind of like relate to y'all. You know, I mean, the fact that my husband practically has them tied up right now in the garage for lectures. So thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate that. So let's talk real quick. This is actually a pretty quick one, I want to say. Not that quick. Most of these slides, if you look through them, is just like every single mode of the autopilot. They talk about it, just like the CVTs. So I'll hit the highlights as I always do and point out questions where I've pulled quiz and especially essay questions out. I'm going to pull my browser over here. You guys can't see, you can't see the browser right now, can you?
We can only see the PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm glad, because I'm actually going to pull open your final exam, and I'm going to make sure that I hit all the highlights on the essay questions that I've created thus far. I may create a couple more, but I will not leave you hanging on what to study. I hate that, personally. Right now, in my final exam essay quiz or essay bank, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I have about 25 questions, and 1, 2, 3, 3 of which are autopilot system questions. So in the essay questions for autopilot, I'm just rewarding the people that are actually going to watch this video. You ready? Explain the half bank mode. Got it? That's one of them. And then the second one is flight director optimizes the takeoff pitch between 11 and 18 degrees based on flap setting and the ratio of what to V-speeds. Okay. And then also, what's your optimized? Okay, so the flight director is optimizing your takeoff pitch between 11 and 18 degrees based on flap setting and the ratio of what to V-speeds. Go look that one up. And then also, actually this is a communication one that we'll go over later, but I ask you, how do you go hot mic on the communication system in the CRJ? You've got to know which button to hit to go hot mic. So those are the 3 things that I just, so far, that I have in your essay on your final. As far as this overview, we're going to look at the flight control panel, or the FCP. We're going to look at flight director and the modes therein, which obviously I gave you at least 1 flight director question on your final. And then autopilot, how it works. And I'll probably not get into the MEL CDL too much, because the way I look at it at MEL CDL questions is that's more of an operational pilot, we're going to fly it tomorrow sort of thing. So let's just focus on the basics here. So autopilot, obviously it's 2-axis. You've got pitch and you've got lateral. All right, that's about as simple as it gets. This is not 1918, so we actually have pitch and lateral. You get all of these different things, and remember what these acronyms stand for. FCP is your panel. FCCs, those computers, you have 2 of them for redundancy, and when you push the button to engage a mode and the 2 lights go on the outside, this is another one I'm going to add to the essay bank. When the 2 lights go on the outside of that button, anyone who's studied this should know what that means, right? Does that mean you're actually engaged?
Does it mean like the FCC has pretty much agreed to it, or they thought it was like within parameters or whatever?
Right, so the word I'm looking for on the essay question will be the FCCs have acknowledged your input. So those 2 lights on either side of the button mean FCCs have acknowledged your input. That's it. Autopilot servo motors, yeah, sure. And then yaw dampers are necessary for the autopilot to engage. You got an IAPS system with all of these things. Basically, it's an interface. It's pure magic. There's computers, electronic components, and it translates all of that into the motion that controls the airplane. Flight directors are weird to me. I've never been a big fan. I feel like they've always been kind of clutter, but you know, those command bars that come up, that's your flight director. And that's how they're displayed on your PFD. It gives you steering commands, and the Mesa Airlines instructor really hammered the fact that each co-pilot needs to know all the modes of the flight director, what it's doing when you hit toga. You know, there's been confusion, I suppose, in training, and that was kind of an emphasis item, was understanding the flight director. So therefore, because he emphasized it, I'm going to emphasize it as well. So you get 2 independent flight directors, FD1 and FD2. Basically, if you're in, 1 controls 1, 2 controls 2, not that hard to remember that. And then you can actually transfer the flight directors, so you can push the transfer button on the flight control panel if you want to. Here's a picture of it. This kind of antiquated picture, but that's what it looks like. It's a little digital magenta bar, command bars. Like I said, in the C-130, they're kind of rudimentary. They weren't exactly perfect, and so I never used them. In the E model C-130, this will make you laugh, the flight director bars were actually pieces of plastic. You could hear them click. So it was really awkward. Nowadays, this technology has improved greatly. So on your PFD, you've got all these things. You got a flight mode enunciator. This is the most important emphasis of this whole lecture. And what I want you to get out of doing your CBTs is, okay, so there's a couple of things you need to know about the flight mode enunciator. We'll get there in later slides, but here it is. This is what you have engaged. It's green, and it's on the left side of this little blue bar. They call it the gate at Mesa. So lateral mode's always the top line. That's a quiz question. That's a final exam question. So lateral on top, vertical on the bottom. You can remember that. I mean, if anyone knows autopilot history, lateral mode was the first one invented. So before they had vertical mode, they had lateral mode. Autopilot engaged to hold you altitude hold was only invented, I want to say, sometime around the late 50s. You can call me on that fact, but I believe lateral was the first one to be invented. Vertical was secondary. So remember, that's on top, that's on the bottom. As far as the captured field, this cyan line is called the fence, and the field to the left is what you actually have engaged. If you have something on standby over here, it'll be white, and it'll be on the right side of the fence. I don't know why I hid this slide. Okay. Moving on, captured field. I don't really care that you know that it flashes green 5 times, or that you say it's 5 seconds, but it is in the bank of questions. Just so you know, I did see that one in, I believe, the quiz. I believe it's quiz 6, the one we haven't done yet. So field to the right is the armed. Armed mode is white. So ALTS, for example. And then right now we have climb mode, and ALTS mode will be it jumps the fence, bounces, or not bounces, but flashes green 5 times and then becomes active once you reach your altitude that you have programmed. Makes sense? So we're at 10,000 feet here and we have 15,000 feet programmed. It'll hop, you'll stop seeing the CLB 268 and voila, ALTS will be green. The FMA display, obviously lateral, vertical, active, and armed. This is, once again, I'm hitting this as hard as the MESA instructor hit this, that's all. And then you've got, whoops, yeah. So this right here, we're looking at the FCP, the flight control panel. You guys should probably know vaguely where it is in the airplane. You've got your posters, right? So when you have your tests and your quizzes, the posters come in handy to show you the location of the panels. Hint, hint. So the left side of the light is FCC1 and the right would be FCC2. And again, when it's illuminated, it's acknowledged the input and conditions are met. So if you have this airplane in like a 45-degree bank and you got your foot on the rudder and you got it all out of trim and you try to engage the autopilot heading mode or you try to make it go to ALTS capture, it's not going to acknowledge you and it's not going to engage. Autopilot's kind of a, depending on the airplane, it can be really tricky to engage the autopilot. In the E-model C-130, we had to have it trimmed up just so, like within 1 degree of perfectly level, and then engage the autopilot. This one's a little more, I guess, forgiving. So here's your flight director buttons, basically the active flight director. It removes the command bars if the autopilot's off. Okay, if you push that button. Oh, pressing the flight director push button does not disengage the autopilot. These, you're very familiar with course set buttons if you're in instrument phase, which all of you have been through, hopefully. And then push the start of the knob and the course pointer points directly to the station. All right. Autopilot transfer. The way you should think about an autopilot, if you've never flown with an autopilot, it's like a human pilot. So if, say, I'm sitting in the right seat and I'm flying the airplane, my autopilot has to be engaged. So if I get up to go to the bathroom, I have to say, I have to transfer aircraft control to the pilot, and he or she has to take the autopilot and engage it on his or her side. So very important to have the autopilot transfer push button. It basically transfers the active side to the first officer. No matter what, whoever's sitting on one particular side has the autopilot. You know, and personally, even though you've got a really advanced jet here and the autopilot's great, you still treat an autopilot like you've given the airplane to a toddler. All right, so anyone who's had a toddler, which most of you have not, understand that you don't just walk out of the room and let the toddler be alone.
We've babysat toddlers.
So yeah, so exactly. So it's really important never to leave an autopilot alone, or really a co-pilot alone with an autopilot. I don't know if I told you guys the story about my co-pilot. I was a new flight, what do you call it, aircraft commander. Nice guy, sitting in the right seat. He was actually a really senior co-pilot. He knew what he was doing. So I went to the back to have a brief conversation with the loadmaster. I was still on headset, and I could hear the flight engineer relentlessly grilling this poor guy about whatever. It was some fuel panel. How do you run the fuel panel? And I could hear him talking and talking and talking. And then I heard ATC come over and say, change flight level. We were at 290. They wanted us at 280 or 270 or something. He goes, Roger, descending 270. And I feel the airplane, you know, you can feel when the power comes back and we start descending. So in the middle of my conversation, I noticed that I'm standing on level ground, and all of a sudden my left foot's coming up higher than my right. The AOA was coming up. And I realized something. He had pulled the power, and because the flight engineer was distracting him, he never put the power back in when he leveled off. So I sprinted like a very fast bunny up to the flight deck, and before I even sat down, I had the power back in, and I was like, hey, we don't have auto throttles. So in this airplane, you also do not have auto throttle. So if you take a flight level change while you're on the autopilot, yes, you can dial it in, but you've still got to control the throttles. Otherwise you will stall. And this is not an Airbus, so it will allow you to stall, even if you're fully engaged and everything's working properly. That's my end of my story. Everything happened, everything was fine. Told the flight engineer to keep his mouth buttoned up when I was out of the seat, please, and let the co-pilot focus. And you know, that actually brings me to a point. If someone's ever on your flight deck, even if it's a senior evaluator or you name it, I don't know, in the airlines, it's not as common as it is in the military, but if people are distracting you and you're flying an airplane, you can tell them to shut up and sit down. I've done it a few times. Always fly the airplane. Here's your flight director sync switch. If for some reason the flight director command bars are off, you can sync them to what you're doing with that. That's when you're hand flying. I can't imagine a time you'd need to do that. Just kidding. You'll hand fly this airplane from time to time. Okay, so here's your lateral modes. There's a lot of them. I don't expect you to memorize all of them, but we're going to go over them one at a time. The one I mentioned as part of your essay for your final is this half bank. The half bank mode is, it can be a little bit confusing. I want you to study that one in particular. The rest of them are pretty straightforward. I mean, you get the roll mode, you get the heading mode, approach. Back course is different than approach. And then obviously you're going to spend most of your time in the nav mode. This navigation mode is how you do lateral navigation in the airplane because you've got your FMS all tuned up with your route of flight. And then takeoff, go around. The roll mode is your default lateral mode. If you set the autopilot, it'll start in roll mode. So it'll roll you wings level if you're less than 5 degrees. Pretty much it. If you want to program in a heading, say you're taking vectors, easy peasy, just push the heading push button and then start rolling your heading knob. Okay. Half bank mode selected by pushing the half bank push button. It, for some reason, 31,600 feet is what the aircraft designers have assessed as an automatic half bank mode. So at that altitude, performance-wise, the airplane needs a half bank instead of a full bank, and it restricts you to 15 degrees. Okay, this is only on the autopilot. You can always grab it and kick the autopilot off and go 60 degrees. Just kidding. I didn't say that. Back course mode, obviously when you're doing a back course ILS, you still set the front course for proper orientation. Okay. So this has been, actually last semester I caught myself teaching this wrong, so I want to teach it correctly now. If you capture a localizer, say you're on the approach, anytime, this half bank, turbulence, and heading modes, they're all cleared. That means you have a full bank authority on final approach. So if it needs to capture the localizer and you're off, it's going to go ahead and take you straight to 30 if it needs to. Okay? Nav mode generates commands to capture and track whatever source you have set. 90% of the time you'll be on that good old GPS scheduled off your FMS. Okay, lateral takeoff mode, all it does is command to hold heading at the weight off wheel signal, and it maintains your heading. So you know, if you're flying into IMC, this is pretty handy. It keeps you oriented to a certain extent. Lateral go around mode does the same thing, generates commands to hold current heading. It's trying to keep you from drastic control inputs right after you take off, or if you're going around. Vertical modes are pitch, speed, approach, pre-select altitude, altitude hold, vertical speed, takeoff and go around. And unlike a C-130, the pitch mode and the speed modes work flawlessly in this airplane. If I were to put speed mode on a C-130, it would hunt around. So say we're in the climb and I want to climb at 180 knots. If I were to select 180 knots in a C-130, my nose would do this the whole time. You'd be sick. In this airplane, I'm just a slight bit because the pitch mode works beautifully. If you have a certain pitch that you want, this one's a little bit more rare, I would say, pitch mode, but speed mode is what they use. in the airlines 99% of the time. So what you'll do is you'll want to climb at, say, an optimum climb speed that your FMS has calculated for you right here. You engage the speed mode about 400 feet after you take off as you're cleaning up, and you climb all the way to whatever pre-selected altitude you have on speed mode. Climb and descent is also really, really handy because you have to say you're descending on an approach to, say, 3,000 feet like this one, this set. If you have a new altitude that you've already dialed in that's below your current altitude, you have a descent mode active and speed mode is automatically selected, which is great. Beautiful system, so easy. You guys have it so easy. It's okay. Slightly jealous. Okay, you can do an indicated airspeed mode with a second press of the speed button to keep yourself at a set. Say you have a speed limit, which happens a lot, especially in European airspace. They don't want you above, say, 190 or 210, whatever it is. You can actually hit that button twice and select a specific speed. Speed knob, change the bug speed, that's all it does. And stop me if you have questions. Vertical approach mode, easy enough. It captures the glide slope. You're gonna fly a lot of coupled approaches in the airlines. Pre-select altitude mode is easy enough too. You just set your altitude that you want in this magenta box, and voila. Like I said, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be flying some form of speed mode, whether it's climb, descent, you'll be flying speed mode. Okay, and then alts cap will flash, come over here and capture the altitude. The altitude alert system sounds a really pretty C chord. It's like ding, ding. It's really soothing. You hardly even notice it, but it sounds at 1,000 feet from your pre-selected altitude. And that's just normal. The C chord also sounds, and this is a quiz question, if you are deviating more than 100 feet during altitude acquisition. So if something's not working, and then say you've captured an altitude and it's 200 feet off, something's not working with the autopilot, it alerts you with the C chord. Also, your altitude bugs and your selected altitude will flash. Hopefully you're awake enough to realize that. See, so yeah, slide 41 is kind of important in terms of quiz questions. Take another look at that. Altitude hold mode, again, pretty easy. It just holds your altitude that you have selected. Vertical speed mode, another one that you might need if ATC says max climb to X, Y, and Z, or maintain 3,000 feet per minute. This happens all the time. Lots of conflicts in Class B airspace. Someone's coming underneath you. They need you out of the way. You may have to engage the vertical speed mode to climb as fast as you possibly can. So you roll this with your thumb up or down based on what ATC tells you to do. Never be afraid to tell ATC if you're in a beast like a C-130. I had to tell them all the time, unable, and basically have them route people around me because I couldn't climb that fast. But CRJs are like little sports cars. These things are, whew, you've probably flown in them, probably all of you. They climb like a beast. I mean, like a cheetah. I'll put a cheetah climbs. What climbs fast? Give me an animal.
Not a sloth.
Not a sloth. The opposite.
The opposite of a sloth.
Climbs like a hawk. I was watching a little hummingbird zipping around outside. I was like, man, that thing is awesome.
What would you compare to a hummingbird? What should helicopters, because they shouldn't aerodynamically be possible.
Exactly. Hummingbirds just amaze me. So vertical takeoff mode, if you push toga switches on the ground, which is what you do, every single time you take off, when you take the runway and you're on the numbers, or you hit the toga button, the first takeoff of the day, it actually recages your FMS, and we'll talk about that in the, I believe the CBT talks about that at length. It tells your FMS, yep, we're on the runway, toga button, and then reinitializes all your location. It gives you a better solution, basically. It also serves the purpose of optimizing a pitch up command for you. I don't know what these hidden slides are. Oh, interesting. I must have hidden these because these are company specific takeoff performance. This is what you'll see. Wish I could show you a picture of the inside of my cockpit. We had a grease pencil and like a white, like a dry erase thing. And the flight engineer had one of those like black metal clip things, and he'd put it up there and write down the performance data. And we'd have basically like 3 numbers: takeoff, climb, and approach speed, and touchdown speed. I guess that's 4 numbers. In this airplane, all of your takeoff data and all of the important numbers are actually bugged, color-coded, and presented to you on your PFD, which is just blows my mind how amazing that is and how convenient. So anyway, you don't need a flight engineer because of all the new technology. Invalid modes have a red line through the affected mode. This is a malfunction. You should not see this. If there's, say, a power loss, you will see these red things, attitude and heading aligning. It's also a pretty bad day. You'll be flying on your standby instruments while you're aligning. Talk more about aligning in just a sec. So rudder needs the yaw damper system. You can't engage the autopilot without the yaw dampers, and the autopilot is controlled by those FCCs. Okay. What they mean by a failed passive autopilot, does anyone know what that means? Failed passive? No? Here's what it means. Basically, the FAA has mandated that if an, how do I put this the right way? Say you're on the autopilot and you disengage it for whatever reason. The airplane should not and could not put you in an out of trim condition that you can't control. You know, it's almost like an aircraft designer limitation. So, for example, does anyone know from commercial ground? I think I taught commercial ground and I taught this. Do you know how much weight, technically, you should be able to put on the rudder? Like, what's the maximum amount of weight on a rudder if you fail an engine on one side? Anyone know?
150.
150. Who was that, Jimmy?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
150 what?
I was going to say 11 pounds.
150 tons.
150 pounds. So,
Tons?
you know what that says to me? I mean, I don't even weigh 150 pounds. And if, like, technically, if one of my engines fails, I have to put more than my body weight on the rudder to control the airplane. Let that sink in for just a second. We have, you know, aircraft designers are not allowed to create an airplane that is basically uncontrollable with, you know, so you'd have to put more than 150 pounds on the rudder. I found my
150 pounds seems really like high actually. Why isn't it lower?
It's not that high, like, to be honest with you. So in the sims, they would fail our outboard engine and I'd have to stand on it. And then not just stand on it, but put a little bit more pressure on while I was flying with the yoke to get it to fly in a straight line. Now, this is without trim. So if you put a little bit of rudder trim in, it alleviates that pressure. And then when you're on an approach, say engine out, and you've got all the weight on that rudder trim, you would take the rudder trim out simultaneously with reducing power. So does that make sense? Like when I reduce power to round out and land, the reason why I need so much pressure on that one engine that's failed is because it's producing so much thrust, I have to overcome it. Long story short, I don't want to get into a performance lecture, but technically speaking, for some of you, it may be over your body weight that you have to push. The autopilot system itself cannot, just like designers can't create an airplane that's uncontrollable by someone over under 150 pounds, the autopilot can't put you in out of trim condition that you can't recover from. This should bring in shades of MCAS. You guys should be thinking about how Boeing kind of hosed their pilots in that way. So any action that's not readily apparent to the pilot, so it has to give you an advisory if it's putting you in a situation, like if it's moving the controls. This is an FAA requirement. So long story short, you don't want this is it, ready for the bottom line. You don't want your autopilot to be able to kill you.
Wow, no shit.
I know. But I mean, if you left it up to engineers, like no offense to engineers, I love you all, but if you left it up to an engineer, they wouldn't think about you, the pilot, so much. They'd probably just design the optimal airplane, not thinking about all the things that could happen. So engagement parameters, you have to have at least one yaw damper. Okay, so if you push those 2 yaw damper buttons, that'll actually disengage the autopilot. Both FCCs have to be operable. Horizontal pitch trim system has to be engaged, at least one channel. And then you can't be in the crazy bank, which is what, you know, they tried to fix that MCAS system. They tried to fix what was going on by engaging the autopilot, and they were too far out of trim at that point. About to sneeze. Dang it. If you say you're about to sneeze, you never can. Okay, so autopilot engaged, you need to push this button to begin with. Before you select any other mode, you have to actually engage the autopilot. I know, rocket science. There's one basic button. And then there's a big button here for the autopilot disengage. There's many ways to disengage the autopilot. I won't get into autopilot out of trim. Yes, there are out of trim indications if that happens. Very rare. Turbulence mode is important. It just reduces the autopilot gain. In other words, it won't overcorrect for every single gust that you encounter. Okay. Clears when you're engaged on the final approach course. Here's your autopilot disconnect. You know, honestly, you'd probably never even notice this. When you disengage the autopilot, it does give you this red AP indicator. And then, so yeah, I'm actually trying to see if I ask you this. Hang on. Nope, and this is, there's a couple of parameters on quiz 7. It asks you to name 3 ways. There's a matching question, multiple answer question, 3 ways you can disengage the autopilot. That's it. So you don't need to memorize all of these. Just memorize the highlights, like toga switch, obviously the disengage switch. There you go. Both the yaw dampers fail, or one FCC. So now when you go to the airlines and you get a job flying this airplane, I would expect you to know each and every one of these. So, but for this class, just 3. Here's another way to disconnect. You've got a red autopilot disengage button right here on your yoke. Once again, let me remind you, you got an autopilot disengage button on your FCP. The toga switches will disengage it. And it'll give you a cavalry charge. It's like a, I can't even make that sound, sorry. I would try, but I would fail at it. And then, so abnormal autopilot operation, AFCS message fail. You're gonna wanna go ahead and disengage the autopilot. And then config autopilot, these are your 2 main warnings. Autopilot engaged on the ground is bad, with especially engines greater than 70% N1. That means you're basically trying to take off with the autopilot pre-engaged, and that's a big no-no. So it'll give you an oral warning for that one. Notice the 1 and 2 inhibits are not present on this warning. So they want you to get that warning if you're on the ground ready to take off. And then you remember the out of trim indications with the little yellow boxes. Those generate cautions. What else? I think that's it for this lecture. We could look at the autopilot in-op MEL real quick, 221001. Oops. 221001. Oops, I'm an AS350. That would really help if I was an AS411. Stand by. This one is, I judge that this one is worth looking at because there's a lot of different things that you're going to have to do as a pilot when you don't have an autopilot that's working. So, oh, actually, while I'm at it, right now I'm publishing all my Jeopardies. Go ahead and use them to study. It's really sad. We almost had so much more fun to do. Here's your test 2 Jeopardy. That's the big one. And then you're coming up on quiz 6. I believe that's already been due, right? Test 2 comprises quiz 7 and 8, which used to be quiz 7 and 8. Now I keep saying that. It's just quiz 7 and your final.
Quiz 6.
Quiz 6, yeah.
When was that?
Hold on, let me pull up the MEL real quick and I'll get.
We haven't. I don't think we've done quiz 6 yet.
Okay, thank God. As
Yeah,
long as it's not
quiz
late.
6 isn't due until this Friday.
Okay. That's all I needed to know.
You scared us there, Michelle.
I didn't mean to say.
Literally.
Contrary
Not once.
if I can't memorize all the due dates, but go with what's in Canvas if it says Friday.
I'm pretty sure quiz 6 says the 1st, right?
No.
Oh, it's April 3rd.
Yeah, quiz 6 is April 3rd.
Thank God.
Let me go to
Yeah,
this.
y'all got me with that April Fool's joke. Good one.
Haha.
That's what it was.
That's what it was. Yeah. Huh?
Sure.
Okay, once again, we're going for 22-10-01. 22-10-01.
While Michelle's finding that, are the pilots, is anyone leaving since the flight line is shut down? Is anyone going to go home?
I've been left.
Alex and I are. Yeah.
You and who said that? Isaiah?
Yeah.
You guys are going to go home?
Yeah, on Friday.
Nice.
I've been home since spring break, and my instructor's like, "Oh, when are you coming back? The training manager wants to know." And then I was like, "Well, now that this whole thing's going on, probably not."
They all want to
That's
know.
when you just say, "Oh, I'll be coming back when the coronavirus situation has been officially ended." Like,
Yeah.
It's funny. He was asking when I was going to come back, and then I gave him a response, and then like one day later, they're like, "Oh, we're shutting down." And I'm like, "Oh."
Is anyone staying around?
No.
I am right now.
Ooh, I'm sorry.
I mean, all of my stuff is here, and like my lease ends in May, so it doesn't make sense to go home to come back to pack it all up.
That's true.
I'm not
If I
even
leave
remember.
Prescott, I get quarantined.
All right, guys, let me wrap this up real quick and then I'll just stop the recording and we can just chat for a little while. But so how you read this, you go to Autoflight, which otherwise known as Autopilot. Look at the number required for dispatch. You can actually fly this airplane with no autopilot. I know, shocker. Except where you have to have it, like RVS operations Cat 2 and 3. If you're not going to be qualified to do Cat 3 in this airplane, so that's why it only says Cat 2. And then you're also required an autopilot for RNAV. Of course, over water, as you remember from AS350. So questions on the MEL? Okay. The other thing that it does, which it doesn't say here in the MEL, but it could say in crew procedures, is that it will limit your duty day. So flying around, hand flying off autopilot in a C-130 limited our duty day to 10 hours. And believe me, 10 hours is a long day with no autopilot. So questions about autopilot flight management system, any of the homework before I stop recording?
Michelle, I have a question, just because I think it might help everyone. I just wanted to confirm that the FD is optimized between 11 and 12 degrees to obtain V2 plus 10.
Are you looking that up right now?
Well, yeah, I have the book, the Aircraft System Study Guide.
It's actually, well, V2 plus 10 is your optimal climb speed, yes.
So is that the answer you're looking for or not?
It's the ratio of two speeds. Can't find that?
Is it VR and V2?
It is. No, it's V1 and V2.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, you know, I believe it goes through it in the CBT. I may be wrong. I'll try to find the exact CBT slide that it talks about. If I can't find it, by God, I'll delete that.
This just says that degrees is optimized to obtain V2 plus 10.
Plus 10 is your climb out speed, yeah.
But I'm not seeing anything about the ratio of those two. I see why, Isaiah, you said VR to V2, because on this one it says, explain the optimized pitch of the flight director, and it literally says flap setting in the ratio of VR to V2.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I read that last night somewhere.
Okay, yeah, go with Alex's answer. I'd have to look it up, actually, right now.
So is it V1, the ratio of V1 and V2?
Is that what it says, Alex?
Isaiah was the one talking. It says VR V2 though.
VR and V2. Okay, go with that answer then. I thought it was V1 and V2, but it's VR and V2. So I stand corrected.
Okay.
You guys have the answer. Yippee. I'll leave it on the final just for you. VR and V2. All right, any other questions? What did we go over between you and me before class? I think it was Monday.
We just went over the homework. So the questions I had on the homework, because this is the homework that doesn't explicitly have, like the second half of the homework, you can't explicitly find some of the answers. Like they're a little bit more convoluted. So we went over like the bottom half of the homework if anyone had trouble with that.
Whoops, I'm about to share it by
So
accident.
like questions, we went over like basically any questions I had between 19 and 26.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't find them in the PowerPoint or in the systems guide. And one of them, I think I just did the wrong CBT for this. So that's why I couldn't find them.
Yeah, okay, so that brings me to another point. You have to do the FMS CBT to answer all the questions in this particular homework. So, and then sometimes it's a process of elimination, like the flight management computer does. It processes navigational sensor data to do, aircraft and engine performance computations is the answer. But the other ones aren't correct because FMS doesn't do attitude and heading references, only Autopilot does that. FMS, the flight management system, is navigational. It's not going to tune your communication radios, for example, like auto tune. So there are some, if you have trouble finding any of these, please just get in touch. I have my cell phone on me today, sitting right next to me. And I know some of those are very obscure because I went through and I did the CBT for the FMS and I created all these extra questions that weren't in there before off the CBT. So I was trying to make it a little more difficult. Okay. I stop my recording now unless you have something else.
Kobe had to leave.
Okay. All right, stop share and how do I stop the recording? Dang it, I always do this wrong. Is it more?